Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the Food 4.0 Pivot, CFIN's half year in review. It's good to have everybody here today. My name is Tyson McGinnis. I'm the Regional Innovation Director for Atlantic Canada at CFIN, and I'm looking forward to hosting a conversation today about our latest Sightline report, and more importantly, what the findings and the data could mean for the future of Canada's food sector. There's a lot happening in food right now, as I'm sure we can all attest. The sector is navigating some trade uncertainty, pressures on costs and margins, changing consumer needs, labor challenges, and an increasing focus on the resilience of our domestic food system. At the same time, technology is moving quickly, from automation to AI to new approaches to ingredients. So the question for us isn't simply what's new in food tech. The more important question is, where's the sector actually placing its bets? And what does that tell us about where the sector might be headed? So that's where the Sightline report is particularly valuable. Rather than looking at innovation in isolation, it brings together signals around capital, technology, industry activity, and what CFIN is hearing from innovators and organizations across the ecosystem. The latest findings give us a particularly interesting snapshot. One of the clearest signals is that the center of gravity in Canadian food tech is moving upstream. Of the 63 million in food tech investment tracked during the first half of this year, over 93% went into three areas: manufacturing tech, food safety and traceability, and next-gen ingredients. Meanwhile, relatively little capital seems to be flowing towards consumer-facing categories. I think that tells us something important. The next chapter of food innovation may be increasingly focused on changing how food is made, how efficiently it's made, how safe and traceable it is, and how we build more resilient supply chains. So today I'd like to encourage us to take a look at the findings, not look at it as much as a collection of stats, but more as signals. Perhaps more importantly, what opportunities and what risks do these create for our companies and our broader ecosystem? So that's the conversation I hope that we can have today. It's going to be a great interactive conversation. We have a fantastic panel assembled, and we'll walk through some of the key findings from the first half of the year, put them in broader context, and then spend some time thinking about what comes next. Before we begin the discussion, a few housekeeping items. The session's being recorded. We use Wordly to translate all of our webinars in real time. Attendees are encouraged to submit questions throughout the webinar using our QA and chat, so please do so, and then we'll address those at the end of the webinar as time allows. So I'd now like to turn things over to our panel and introduce them. We have a great rounded panel with perspective from industry, from a founder and investor point of view. So firstly, we have Nithya. She's the editor at Annex Business Media, where she leads the content strategy for two national B2B brands, including Food in Canada, which, as everyone knows, is one of Canada's leading media outlets focusing on the food and beverage manufacturing industry. So welcome, Nithya. Good to have you here.
Great to be here too, Tyson. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks. Awesome. And next we have Chris Bryson. He's the founder and CEO of NSTX Industries, a Toronto-based food tech company developing proprietary manufacturing tech for the next generation of meat and seafood alternatives. His platform combines product innovation, R&D, and specialized manufacturing, including the New School Foods brand. Welcome, Chris.
Delighted to be here. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar. Super excited to be part of this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. And our third panelist is Colin Phillip. He's the CEO of Verdex Capital, a purpose-driven venture capital firm investing in Canadian ag tech, and food tech. At Verdex, Colin leads the firm's work investing patient capital in early-stage Canadian companies and supporting commercialization and scale-up of innovation across the agri-food sector. It's great to have you join us, Colin.
Thanks, Tyson. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So why don't we get into things? I might throw some questions towards one person to start, but at any time, please jump in and have a good conversation, and then we'll have chances for the audience to engage throughout the chat and questions at the end. So Nithya, when we look at the first half data, consumer-facing tech has taken a bit of a back seat, with over 93% of capital moving more into, as I mentioned, manufacturing, automation, next-gen ingredients. From your editor's kind of perspective at Food in Canada, how does that compare to what you're hearing on the ground?
It pretty much mirrors what we're seeing, Tyson. And It's not really a surprise. I mean, given the economic climate in which we are all living under, and the need to innovate and the need to diversify is forcing, is directing and forcing these investment decisions. Like this year, we've been seeing a lot of investments by big food companies like Kraft Heinz, Danone, Gailey, Sunrise Farms, and most of it is to increase production capacity and modernize production lines with some sort of automation. Now, of course, these investments have been largely the result of grants and loans from the public sector. As many people on the call will know, the federal government has introduced several programs like the National Food Security Strategy and has increased funding to crown corporations like Farm Credit Canada and Export Development Corporation to help F&B manufacturers find efficiencies and grow in the wake of this escalating trade war with the US. So it pretty much matches what you're seeing, Tyson, what the report says.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Appreciate those insights. Colin, from your perspective as an investor looking and seeing the vast majority of capital flowing into what you might call more industrial food tech, what do you think is driving that move?
I think it's a shift away from sort of, more towards proof and adoption technology, right? So when we see that things have traction and commercial adoption, customer base, repeat revenue, that becomes a lot more investable for folks in this sort of the venture stage of things. And some of the bigger capital projects equally have a different kind of financing. And sometimes it's easier to get a loan for a large capital project than it is for a pure seed stage startup concept. So I wouldn't say there's an imbalance there. It's just different kinds of capital need across that sector. So I think we're seeing a lot more proof required, which drives different kind of financing. And we're also seeing a lot of shift towards large infrastructure type projects that take on a different kind of capital.
Right. That's interesting. And I'm wondering too, I mean, I was at an investment conference a little while ago, and they were talking a little bit more as well about the trends towards, more investment in deeper tech versus perhaps SaaS or consumer apps and that kind of thing. Are you noticing that as well happening?
I think the biggest shift we've seen certainly in the last 12 months, and you compare it back to a number of years ago, is a lot more proof is required. Investors are looking for validation. We're saying, do you have customers? Are you solving a real problem? And you go back 5 years ago, certainly in the ag tech space, there was lots of great concepts, but they weren't necessarily solving a producer pain point or need. And with the shift we see more recently is a lot of the innovators and entrepreneurs we talk to are solving a real pain point. And they're actually helping that food innovator, that farm producer, whatever it might be, tackle a real challenge in their operation in a way that doesn't necessarily disrupt their workflow. It actually helps them improve what they're doing in real time.
Yes, yeah, that's very true. That's also what I notice in my position talking to companies in my region and across the country. You're also seeing a lot more companies building traction and moving from a neat idea to actual solid results and momentum. So it's great to see. Awesome. Chris, first of all, congrats on the NSTX for closing one of the largest food tech deals in Canada this year. Very impressive. Obviously, you're blending a lot of private VC and government grants, like from PIC, and you've also received some CFIN funding in the past too, I should mention. But when in terms of in a market where private venture capital can be tough to come by, how critical has it been for you to kind of blend the funding model of for founders trying to build, real physical manufacturing infrastructure in Canada? What has been your perspective?
I think it's essential, and it's also what makes investing in Canadian companies hyper attractive. So if you think about food and getting investment into food, one of the tougher things about food is food tends to be very cheap. And so building a company that's going to generate outsized returns for investors over a medium-sized period of time can be really difficult to make those unit economics the bigger economics of like an investment workout, right? So if you're thinking about private capital, they're going to be looking at, well, maybe I should just throw my capital into the S&P 500 for argument's sake. So how can we generate outsized returns on food, which is a category where it's like down to the margin over like a generous, not too long period of time. So we need to be generating those outsized returns. If you capitalize your company in a way that a lot of companies in our category have historically done it, you lead to a point where the math just doesn't work out. So for example, there's a company in France that recently went out of business that was a competitor of ours. where they raised, I think it was somewhere in the order of like 100, 120 million euros. And they built a mega sized facility. But if you're building if you're at an early stage raising that much capital, like north of $100 million, to build these large facilities, then you're going to have to become a billion-dollar company in 5 to 6 years, and that can be really, really difficult to achieve. So, what's interesting about Canada, in the sense that we are now increasingly seeing more and more grant programs come online, and also more of those grants be supportive of capital investments, which is amazing, is suddenly you can completely change the math for the investor. So the investor now, you can put half as much money in the company. So in theory, you can get to your goal with half as much of a financial outcome, but still generate the same return for the investors, because you're subsidizing the investment in this kind of stuff. And to be honest, I think that that's to build large outcomes in food, and to have large returns, we do need to make investments. And this has historically been Canada's problem, is we don't tend to invest in capital. The government's moving in that direction, but I still think that, like, from a private capital perspective, we're still seeing a lot of traditional conservative Canadian approaches. I do think that if you look at Canada as a category for food investments, it is probably one of the more attractive spaces geopolitically to invest in because of these subsidies. So I think Canada's the best place to build right now.
Cool, that's awesome. Anything that Nithya or Colin would like to add to that?
I certainly agree with Chris's comments there. And I think one of the key differentiators for Canada as a market is the non-dilutive capital through folks like Kane or Natural Products Canada, PIC and others, that multiple purposes. It helps close a bit of a gap in the funding stack. It allows investors to go further and faster, allows us to keep capital to help the companies grow. But it allows, in many cases, that company to get from a stage that's not quite venture ready from an investor point of view to investable. And that's one of the key unlocks that we have in this country that is a very key differentiator compared to other markets.
Yeah. I agree with what Chris and Colin are saying, and I just want to add a consumer perspective to it. I mean, globally, Canadian food is viewed as being with high standards of food safety and the quality. There's never a doubt or question about any of those things when food is concerned, which is manufactured in Canada. So it's always a plus, right? So there's not much on that front that Canadian companies need to sell or market on that front. And I think getting in those federal funding, those government funding, kind of minimizes the risk for investors, I would believe. I mean, I'm not an investor, Colin is, but I think it kind of helps bridge the gap and minimizes the risk and makes it more attractive for companies to invest.
Yes, yeah, for sure. It's definitely a situation where you need the combination of both, right? You need that private investment for leading, and then some of that non-dilutive support to be able to really extend things and make the ROI better and a little more patient, perhaps, that way. Another question. The data shows that our domestic, and this is kind of building off a little bit what we just said, the data shows that our domestic private capital base is small in Canada, and it relies heavily on a few reoccurring firms and funds and some foreign-led investors. Colin, from where you sit, what needs to happen to unlock more growth stage patient capital in Canada so our food tech companies can grow and grow more so within the country?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of that in real time, Tyson. A lot of, to me, it's a good thing that you've got specialized funds that are focused on food and agriculture. A generalist fund trying to play in this space. There's different realities in ag and food in terms of adoption cycle, timeline to exit. It's a different animal compared to other investing classes. So I think it's a good thing that it's a specialized group of investors and funds that focus on that. And most of the funds that are active in this space are actively raising new capital to deploy into this space. So I don't see it as a gap in our market. Where we have a gap in Canada is the overall stack. Right? We've got capital at certain stages well covered. We don't at later stages. And a lot of times what happens is you can see a really successful company that's invested in by Canadian VCs and other financing providers that outgrows the capital available in the country or can't get to that next hurdle. Right? In some of the bigger financing arms might have a $5 million minimum. Right? So a company's got to get big enough to be at that stage for that investor. So it's sort of closing the gaps in the stack more than a lack of available capital. But it's a good thing that we have a specialized focus. And equally, it's not a bad thing to have some degree of foreign capital in the market. We equally look to invest in good companies that are coming into Canada. So we're kind of going the other way around, saying, can we bring that technology into the country and be a catalyst for creating that innovation and entrepreneurial opportunity here in our market in Canada.
Yes, yeah, fair enough. And definitely the fact that we are building a stronger and stronger pipeline with more and more great companies doing good things at the early end, that's going to create more demand on the other end, which hopefully over time will get addressed through foreign and probably through some new Canadian endeavors too. So that's great. Um, I'm 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 curious about how these trends in food tech investment are kind of translating on the ground in terms of adoption of Canadian, food tech. Nithi, you mentioned this a little bit earlier. For example, at CFIN, we're definitely seeing more and more companies developing traction, scaling their operations. It's fantastic. But when you look at the historical numbers, Canada has been lagging globally. When you look at food robotics adoption, I think we're 15th globally. So Nithya, like when you're looking at Canadian food manufacturers, what do you think really their level of embracing automation to combat labor and supply chain pressures? Is that happening in large amounts, or are you still seeing barriers that need to be addressed?
So it's moving slowly but steadily. I'd like to put it that way. I mean,
Yes.
the current economic, as I mentioned, since January, things have changed a little bit. So the pressure is there on these companies. Their largest trading partner has put up these barriers, and now companies are forced to look for new markets. So in this stage, they're in a race against time to find new markets. So literally, the companies have no choice but to sprint and to scale up, and there's a reckoning within them that they need to do that. So with the grants that are available, companies are now investing in automation, and we also know that labor is a big challenge. They don't have easy access to quality labor. Companies are recognizing it, and we're seeing those big investments by big food companies, like as I mentioned earlier. So it's happening at a level, but it's slow. But there's a change, Tyson. I want to say the companies are recognizing and are giving it some time and thought. And I think they don't have a choice. They need to automate.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, certainly we've seen in some cases, some food manufacturers that I've spoken to recently, where it might have been a question of ROI at one point, looking at an automation solution. Now it's a point of sustainability of the operation. If you can't find the staff, et cetera, you have to look at other opportunities, and technology is certainly a key piece in that equation. And wondering, Chris, kind of from your perspective, one of the themes that we're touching on a little bit here is the fusion of next gen ingredients with specialized manufacturing models. And you definitely have firsthand experience building novel products, but I'm sure, as you know, it often means that you can't just buy off the shelf equipment to be able to make those a reality. So what are some of the biggest operational friction points you're experiencing as you scale up, moving from pilot to more full commercialization?
I would say that the problems. I mean, obviously, there's when you're doing any sort of scale up, there's natural scale up surprises and challenges that will occur, or you have to navigate your way through those. Right? It just takes time to figure out how to scale up any given new technology. So that's, to me, par for the course. I don't think there's anything unique about doing that in Canada. I think what is challenging though is doing so in Canada. So as much as we're obviously in a very fortunate position to have raised a good amount of capital, it took a large amount of time to raise that capital. And so putting a lot of time and effort towards raising capital can be distracting for a business. And especially when it requires you to sort of attract a lot of that capital externally. So you're traveling more and so on and so forth. So I think that candidly, the pendulum in some agri sectors has swung so far to the other side because there were so many companies that were so heavily overcapitalized. I want to say, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, that now everything is so myopically focused around how much revenue have you built, or how much, and those are logical and understandable things, but sometimes you need to build something in order to get your costs down, in order to drive some of those financial targets. So I think that, candidly, to answer your question more succinctly, the biggest challenge has been, I think, a cultural one. So when dealing with private Canadian capital, Verdex exempted. Verdex, we are very happy to have as investors in our company. But I think that traditionally the private capital markets in Canada are way too conservative, and even when they do invest in ag tech, they're investing in software for ag tech. They're investing in AI for ag tech, stuff that like is fundamentally still a technology solution. It's not boots on the ground. It's not picks and shovels. It's not manufacturing infrastructure. So so I think that's actually been our biggest challenge. I think the R&D we have smart entrepreneurs, we have talented food scientists, great engineers in Canada. There's no reason why we can't solve these challenges, but we do. I think as a result of Canadian culture and conservatism, we we are too slow to move to invest in companies, and that pace at which we operate can be very destructive to companies here.
And I don't disagree with Chris on that, and certainly appreciate the kind comments on our firm. But what I'd say, the pendulum it did swing too far, and I think it is starting to swing back to a little bit more of a moderate position. But one of the gaps that we see certainly from our lens is there's not a lack of entrepreneurs or innovation. There really isn't a lack of capital. What we're seeing is a lack of adoption, particularly in Canada. And the market is slow to adopt, which makes it hard for innovators to show traction and prove to the private capital markets. Whereas south of the border, folks are a little bit more willing to try something new, which means you can see those early data points quicker, which means private capital can be a little more risk tolerant. It's venture investing is not blind faith. You need to have some degree of some track record, some proof, something more than a concept outside of that pre-seed stage, and that's its own specialized investing space as well. So one of the things that we loved about Chris and team at NSTX and the New School Foods team was they're solving a real problem. There's a pain point that's being addressed with an innovative solution. So even without necessarily huge track record, we liked what we saw. There's track record there, which is great, but we liked there was a real problem that had a real solution to a real pain point. So that, I think, is where the pendulum is swinging, is that private capital is saying, we don't need to see laundry lists of customers. We need to see that the market accepts what you're doing is solving a problem. So it's not just conceptually. And the more that we can get Canadian businesses, Canadian consumers downstream to adopt new technologies, that kind of creates that pull through where the innovators got the early data point to unlock the private capital that brings in more dilutive, which brings in more capital, et cetera. So it's, I think we focus at the one end of the spectrum where really it's that risk adoption, conservative adoption cycle that I think hinders our innovation sector more than the capital or any lack of entrepreneurs. We have a great field of innovators and entrepreneurs in this country. We're blessed with that as a country more so than most, and we just need to give them the tools to be able to get to market quicker.
I agree with what Colin is saying because, I've spoken there was one food entrepreneur who I was speaking to. He said he had to take his product out of Canada and, take it to a different country like Australia and the Middle East because he found greater acceptance for what he was showing over there than in Canada. And of course, we've always heard of this. We've also heard of this cycle of pilot test after pilot test and pilot test, right? So there is that culture of risk aversiveness among Canadians. I wish we were a little more bolder to innovate, but maybe the situation and the times that we are in will force us to change our attitude and be a little more bold.
Yeah, very true. I mean, to build on what each of you has said, I've heard that with a number of the companies that the food tech innovators that we work with on a daily basis, that there is a small pocket of early adopters in Canada that are forward, very more risk willing and willing to become early adopters. But quite often you end up going to other markets rather quickly to be able to get some scale and get enough customers that are really keen on your solution. And then you end up coming back and filling that in after you're kind of more established with kind of some more conservative Canadian customers. So that is when I'm talking to food tech companies, the two things that first come to mind are usually they're looking for investment and they're looking for customers. And those go hand in hand, just as Colin alluded to. Are you solving a real problem? But then is the customer really willing to come along with you and actually write a check to make that a reality? So very true that it's not as simple as looking at one part of the equation. It's really a puzzle that has to come together. Kind of as we look at Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead, Colin. Yeah.
One of the things that we see too is Canada's sort of food manufacturing base in domestically itself is somewhat reliant on other markets, right? So it's the
Yeah.
innovators are almost forced to prove themselves ex Canada to be of relevance to the Canadian-based, sometimes foreign-owned food manufacturing companies. So there's a bit of a conundrum there that how do we even build a domestic capacity when we don't necessarily have a lot of it here? So that coupled with the size of the market south of us, getting a small piece of that as your proof of concept versus a small piece of Canada, you've suddenly got a data point as an innovator that's a lot more tangible and relevant to the investors to say, well, I've got this much of this market. Well, that's you can extrapolate that much further and it proves out your market acceptance much greater than a
Yeah.
small piece of Canada. So there's a bit of a trickiness there too that we see in the market.
Right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And of course, I mean, none of these answers definitely applies to everyone. Each business is its own, and some have very niche and strong focuses towards one segment of an industry where you do have to go deep internationally in order to get that critical mass. While in other cases, it's a little bit more wide, and it could have more Canadian customers at the end of the day. As we look and move forward, looking ahead towards the rest of this year and into 27, I'm curious what everyone's perspective is on what's the single biggest factor that's going to determine kind of how Canada plays out in this role are we going to be a global producer and exporter of food tech versus, an adopter? And kind of curious what each of you think in regard to the kind of the future moving forward.
Well, I'll kind of come back to my previous comment, Tyson, that we don't really have an innovation or capital shortage. It really is that adoption cycle. If we truly want to be a leader in food innovation, we need to be a leader in adopting that same innovation. That's really what will drive the success of our innovators and entrepreneurs, and through that, the ability for private capital to deploy and support those innovators and entrepreneurs. So that's really what we need to see going into 27 is that Canadians in the marketplace get more comfortable trying new things and taking that adoption risk to help create that successful platform for the entrepreneur.
Thanks, Colin. Nithya?
Yeah, I agree with Colin. And, on other front, I think for companies, big food companies, or generally any F&B manufacturer, the most important thing would be investing in automation and AI technology. Most of them shy away from that because they think the ROI is not worth it, or the initial investment is huge. I get that. I mean, right now they want to stick to the capital because they don't know what's going to happen, what policy changes people south of the border are going to make and how it's going to impact their bottom line. So I get they want to stick to their capital, but I urge them to invest in automation and some sort of AI technology. And in terms of policy, I mean, I love the fact that the government is finally investing in agri-food, pumping in money, but we need more of that. Whatever capacity and infrastructure that we need to build requires a lot more funding, and I want the governments to keep funding. And lastly, free trade agreement, please, with the US. Make that happen. We need that.
Yes, fair enough. That could definitely be another series of webinars for sure.
Yes.
But very timely for sure. Yeah. Chris, curious on your thoughts.
I think Canada is at a fork in the road where we have an opportunity to really step up and massively increase our presence as a global superpower in the food category. Obviously, we've built a lot of great infrastructure and great companies and great products to date. But traditionally, we've been an ingredient supplier. We don't tend to create as much or support as much, finished goods and creation and stuff like that. So I think lots of great comments. I agree with. There's huge opportunity to invest in automation and AI. But if we look even more broadly than that, I think investing in Canada right now, given the geopolitical situation, is a very unique opportunity, right? For the most part, most Canadian food exports are still covered under USMCA or CUSMA. So we still have access to one of the world's biggest markets, literally across the border. We have lower, typically because of our Canadian currency, we have lower operating costs than our counterparts would have in the US. You have now government subsidies that are increasingly supporting capital expenditures. I do think we still have a bit of a shortage in private capital on the Series A side. So when you start to get that initial traction, we still see that on the capital stack, investments when it comes to the bigger kind of like bigger leaps of faith in terms of investing in manufacturing infrastructure, there doesn't tend to be as much of that. There's a lot of kind of early stage capital, but kind of as you get into that death valley, that is where you really feel it in Canada. But I think that if we as a country can really take the lead that we're seeing from the federal government, which is trying to go all in on food, we have a really unique opportunity to become a global superpower for food and not just an ingredients provider. So I think there's the opportunity, but we still have to do work to get there. And I think that requires cultural shift. It requires us to operate more quickly. I think, as a founder, where we always want things done yesterday, we want to see that the partners that we work with, the investors that we work with, also make decisions quickly. Not everything needs to be a yes, but I'd rather get a no in 2 days than a no in 2 months or a no in sometimes 6 months. So I think we need to operate efficiently, and we need to invest. And if we do that, we can do incredible things. I think Canada has such unique opportunity, and I hope everyone else comes to that same conclusion.
Yeah, that's excellent, Chris. Thank you very much. You make a lot of good points, and in terms of moving quickly, moving at the speed of business, and being able to, I mean, we're in a competitive world, and certainly when you have a lead in a market or an opportunity, being able to capitalize on it as quick as possible is definitely very important. And earlier, when Colin kind of mentioned a little bit about on the customer side, on the industry adoption side, that's why I look at a program like we have our Food Tech Next program, where it's all about having an innovator and an early stage customer be able to sense check that and work through the kinks and be able to build that momentum. And it's figuring out lots and lots of different ways of doing more of that so that we can really accelerate companies and get them on that next path. Jess, I'm curious how we're doing with the chat, and any questions from the audience.
Yeah, there's a few questions.
Okay.
If anyone else would like to drop questions, feel free.
Okay.
So one of the first questions we have is, any recommendations on how to better drive adoption in the marketplace given current economic uncertainty? Anyone want to jump in?
My thought would be one of the things that I think we struggle with as a country is we spend too much time thinking about other countries. And at the end of the day, a lot of the narrative around CUSMA and all that it is what it's going to be. We as Canadians need to focus on moving forward on our own innovations, creating our own marketplace, removing trade barriers. There is more friction between some of our provinces than there is going across the Canada-US border. So we need to, I think, to some degree as a country, focus on our own backyard. And as Canadians, get on with supporting Canadian innovation and innovative Canadian companies. That will do more for us than worrying about what our neighbor to the south may or may not do tomorrow or next week, next month.
Yeah. Well said, Colin. Curious what you think, Nithya.
I agree with what Colin is saying. I mean, we can only control what we can control, right? Thinking about things that are not in our hand, it's pointless. So focusing on what we can do, we can definitely work towards removing those those barriers that are there between provinces, and truly making trade free within Canada is something that we can absolutely do, and we should be doing that.
Mm-hmm. Chris, any thoughts on that question?
I mean, I'll state the obvious. If you want to drive adoption, make better products that are cheaper. And that fundamentally comes down to more research and development, which we need to be okay with investing in.
Excellent. Great.
Awesome. Is there a way to de-risk adoption for potential adopters so that we can expedite the cycle from pilot to purchase order?
Very good question. Chris, why don't we go back to you on that one? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of repeating myself, I think food is really difficult, and we've many times seen folks who come from the tech world, and like I'm guilty of this. Prior to this business, I was in the software industry. We celebrate in the startup world this whole culture of fail fast. If you fail fast in food, you're going to fail. Because customers won't, you can build a piece of software and launch it and send it to someone, and if it's not perfect, they'll at least give you some sort of kudos for the progress that you've made. But if you literally leave a bad taste in someone's mouth, it is very difficult to reestablish that relationship. So I think food is a little bit unique, and we just need to be careful about not pushing food companies to rush the wrong products to market, because that can backfire. So I'm not answering the question, because I think the question, what I want to point out is that we don't fall into the wrong strategies. I think we have to make sure that our strategies are specific to food and don't get appropriated from the tech industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think there's some policy work too that the government's been very good about putting sort of capital out there, non-dilutive financing and other sort of supports. But there's probably a whole bucket of work around your de-risking from a tax point of view, how you account for investors investing in innovation technologies, and for the companies themselves, what is the tax treatment on adopting that new piece of equipment that would then sort of create a different economic incentive for these organizations to innovate faster. It's not always about capital to build. It's sometimes about capital or an economic incentive for the company or the consumer to take that leap, to take that risk, and to move quicker.
I will say that we've had a lot of luck, even in our own backyard, finding lots of prospective customers or people that are willing to sort of give us feedback. So we're trying to create a culture, at least internally, where everything is, the risk of stating the obvious, like everything has to tie back to what's going to benefit our end customer, whether that's a B2B customer or an end user. So creating those short feedback cycles is essential, and making sure that ties directly into your product roadmap prioritization, I think, is essential. It sounds more obvious than it is in execution, because oftentimes there's going to be the temptation in the lab to keep working on something, or in the engineering workshop to keep working away and improving at something. But perfection can be the enemy of progress. So I think there is a way to sort of advance quickly. It's not hard in Canada, I think, to find people that are willing to test out your product. You just need to get out of the office and find people and just knock on doors and not be shy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Chris reminds me of the fact that food is such a long cycle. So being patient through as you innovate is something that you shouldn't be compromising on. I mean, get the product right before you get it out of the door. I mean, we're ruthless none of us will go back to a product if it tastes bad, right? Or it doesn't meet our expectations. So take your time. I don't know if there's a way to de-risk that, but it seems to me you just have to be there for the long haul.
Well, I think one of the things that was most compelling for our team, Chris, was the chance to try the product like that. It was we discussed it internally. Okay, conceptually could kind of wrap our head around it, but when the chef came out and did the demo for us and we tried it, it was mind blowing. Like, it looked so good, tasted so good. On the salmon side, and even your earlier iterations around short rib, which I know were more R&D focused, was great, right? And so the chance to try that before waiting until it was perfectly perfect was great, because that allowed us to give feedback to say, hey, this is what we liked, what we didn't. So that opportunity to try the product was phenomenal for us.
Yeah, I think that now that we're talking about the question more, it's sort of making me realize that a couple of the strategies that we have, which happy to share, that have helped us quite a bit, is to make sure that when you go and you ask for feedback, we always try as much as possible to never bring one product. I think that's a classic mistake, because when you bring only a single product or a single version of one product, right? You could arguably bring two versions of the same product or multiple different products, and you're looking for feedback, especially in Canada where we're all trained to be nice. Folks don't tend to want to, excuse my language, but they don't want to rain on your parade. They don't want to be negative, even though that's really what you need. You really need to understand what's wrong with it. How can it be better? When you bring two different products, it can be easier for your audience to say, oh, I like this better. That doesn't feel as destructive or negative. It's more constructive. What do you like better about this versus that? And that can help you to extricate the insights about what is driving consumer preference. And we do keep going back to those folks. And every time, with every conversation, we always give them permission to be negative. So I think it's very important to seek out that uncomfortable truth. Even if you probably already know what's wrong with your product, it's still helpful to go out and get it. And to translate that continuous feedback cycle into a culture of rapid iteration. Like, this can all happen before you launch commercially, But so you can keep testing with prospective customers until you launch officially, until you know you're ready to go. But so I'm not saying don't like put it in front of a customer. Obviously, put it in front of a customer as much as you can until you feel like you're totally there, and try as much as possible to create that culture of iteration within your own organization, so that folks don't think that good enough is acceptable. I think that is speaking on behalf of the plant-based industry. I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire industry, but our category failed because we stopped innovating. Right? We put out a lot of products that just didn't meet customer expectations, and there was very little that was done in order to close those gaps. So I think it's very important with food to just never accept good enough. Keep pushing for whatever makes your product better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm getting some flashbacks from a former life when we were developing products that were going to a grocery partner, and definitely that early stage kind of and sometimes you don't have those relationships, and this is all dream world. But if possible, the more that you can have some potential customers or existing customers get engaged and provide you that feedback, the better. I totally hear what you're saying, Chris, about trying to get actual real authentic feedback and not just pleasant, positive things that can end up coming back to hurt you. But that's one thing for sure. And I do think there are improvements on this, but for those companies that are also looking to leverage the government funding to support various stages of product development, it is really a bit of a process to get good at turning those around quickly, because it can slow down your path to market if you're waiting 6 months between each step along that way. So that's not easy, but it is something over time that if you have good relationships with a couple of key funding partners, it can help kind of expedite that along a little bit. But then at the end of the day in food, like you mentioned, or I think I'm not sure which, if it was you, Chris, that mentioned, at the end of the day, it does go to market. And even if the customer liked it along the way and everything, the point of real truth is when that end consumer buys it, and then do they rebuy it? And there always is that leap of faith, especially in food, a little different than in the software world. So it's just the nature of the game. There is a little bit more risk, but there's some things you can do to tighten up that adoption cycle, I think.
Well, it's that culture of continuous innovation is one of the things that we look for quite actively in our portfolio companies and in the management teams we invest in. Is it's one thing to have an idea, but that constant innovation shows an ability to evolve, to adapt, shows agility. And when the product is good, you know the next version is going to be even better. And I can tell you candidly, the team here can't wait to try the next version of the salmon fillet. What we saw was amazing. I have no doubt it's even better now.
Yes, awesome. Great. Any more questions on your end, Jess?
Yeah, there's a couple more.
Okay.
For a next-gen ingredient startup that can't use co-packing, do you suggest starting small and growing organically or looking for investment?
Good question.
It's a call-in question, I would say, I would argue.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that question. I would say probably a founder's perspective from Chris is probably more valuable than mine. I'll say what probably sounds a bit biased, right? Venture capital is intended to help accelerate growth. So we're looking at what is that capital going to do to help you grow that business, and it's what stage are you at? And I'm really impressed when entrepreneurs understand the value that the investor is going to bring to the table in terms of what those dollars are going to do. Oftentimes there's that, oh, I don't want to dilute myself. I don't want to, give up control. But the ability to bring in the capital to help you grow your business allows you to get something bigger, quicker, faster, and to give you the resources you may not have to bootstrap it on your own. So there's no single answer to that question of do you co-pack or take capital, because it varies by situation. But I would say when it comes to raising capital, be intentional of what you want the capital for, how it's going to help you grow, and is it the right stage for that capital? Too early is going to be too punitive to you. Too late, you may miss the right opportunity. And candidly, most investors will tell you where it fits in their stack and their focus and their thesis, and you can calibrate from there. That come talk to us in 6 months. You're not quite at the stage we like to invest in. So exploring early and being ready for what their investors are prepared to do is the most important part.
Thanks, Colin. Chris, curious in your thoughts?
Yeah, it's difficult to provide a blanket piece of advice without knowing more. I think to Colin's point, it is really situation dependent. I'm a big believer. we avoided co-packers because we had developed something novel, right? So that's a reflection on us trying to embrace development of a more purpose-built manufacturing technology. And so co-packers aren't an option because we're trying to, in some ways, become the co-packer. If you have a unique piece of technology, I think that's something worth investing more and more time with, so that you can protect that. As soon as you start using a co-packer, you sort of relinquish that R&D control. That often requires capital. So I would say, if you're at the point where you're trying to decide if you have a path to do it without raising capital, you have more time to build up more proof points, so that when you do have to go raise capital, you certainly have a stronger story. Obviously, if you can raise capital when you don't need it, you tend to do better than when you need it. So there's also catch-22. It also really comes down to, do you really need that capital? Are you too early? To Colin's point, you have to also think about the implications of a fundraise cycle. So our fundraise cycle on the last funding round, I think, was easily 9+ months. And so that becomes a huge distraction for you as a founder to make that your priority and to not be building your business, and which has consequences. It has trade-offs. So it's like I said, it's hard to say. You have to weigh all these pros and cons, but make sure that your story, if you feel you're at the point to accelerate, to Colin's point, make sure you have your story tight, and just make sure that, whatever the core IP is that you have, like, protect that.
Thank you. Good answer. Jess, any more questions?
Yeah, I think we'll do one more.
Okay.
What, in your opinion, is the importance of planning for future workforce skills from an agri-tech perspective? Should colleges partner with investors to support the uncertainty of hiring for advanced technology?
That's a good question. Can you just repeat that again, Jess?
What, in your opinion, is the importance of planning for future workforce skills from an agri-tech perspective? Should colleges partner with investors to support the uncertainty of hiring for advanced technology?
Yeah, so on the agri-tech side, from our lens here, we're ag and food focused. One of the things, I didn't come from an ag farming background, whereas most folks in agriculture do. I think the opportunity in the agri-tech space specifically is to connect into the non-agriculture community. So someone going to UBC in Vancouver has probably really never thought about an agri-tech career the same way someone at University of Guelph might be, or University of Saskatchewan as examples. So I think there's a huge opportunity to make folks aware of the kinds of careers that are available in the space that are very highly technical. And on an agri-tech or agriculture side of things, it's not just digging in the dirt that we tend to think of farming as being. There's a lot of technology and science in the product, in the machinery, in the seed, the chem, all of it. Equally on the food side of it, I think we need to make sure folks understand the kind of innovative opportunities that exist within sort of the food innovation space, and understand that there's really rich, compelling careers. And it's not so much that we need to partner to find the opportunities, it's broadening the awareness of the opportunities that exist in the overall ag and ag food space. And Nithya, you probably have more perspective on that than me from your editor's desk.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with whatever you said, Colin, but the one thing that I don't really, their investment is definitely required. I mean, there is a need for more R&D at the institution level and to develop a certain workforce, because, we're looking at certain skill sets that current people don't have, like when AI comes into play, the skill set that for machine learning, what skill sets, we don't even know how that's going to look like in 5 years and 10 years. So there's definitely work to be done on that front. I mean, we definitely need investment, but I'm not sure if that's the role of private investors. I mean, I feel it's more the role of public sector investments, and maybe colleges and universities on their own raising capital to fund these R&D centers. It is worrying to me that some R&D centers, funding is being taken away and the government is withdrawing from that space. But we need funding. I'm not sure if it's the role for private. And I agree with Colin when there's need to raise more awareness about the kind of jobs and the kind of work that we do in agri-food. It's no longer the case where an operator is standing there for 8 hours in a cold room, feeding meat through an extruder or through a filler, trying to make those nuggets. And that's not really anymore, right? I mean, you do have those companies also, but they're also moving away from that to more automation. So I'm not sure if it answers, but these are my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Nithya. That's good for sure. Okay, so Jess, is that do we have any more questions come in, or are we?
I think we answered most of the questions. Yep.
Okay.
I do
Okay.
have some quick slides to share.
Okay, fantastic.
There we go. Okay. Sorry. Oh, so, good grief. Sorry, I'm having some serious technical issues over here. So we have our CFIN Plus paid membership, which is designed for food tech innovators, manufacturers, entrepreneurs, and researchers who are looking to accelerate their growth. CFIN Plus members get access to data, insights, exclusive partner offers, and direct support to turn ideas into impactful solutions. And if you're ever interested in collaborating with CFIN or exploring partnership, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to Mona to start the conversation. And that's it from me. So Tyson, go on ahead and wrap it up.
Okay, awesome. This has been a really interesting conversation for me. I hope everybody listening in has picked up something that they can take as a takeaway and build off of. Definitely, from what I've seen just in the last 4 years at CFIN is that we're really seeing a very strong growing food tech sector in the country, and I think one of the themes that emerged is now connecting the dots between those innovators and more of the food industry and having more of that kind of collaboration happen so that we can get really great win-wins across the country. So a big thank you to Colin, Nithya, and Chris for all of your expertise and insights today. It's been fantastic. So thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to come and share with our network here today. And thank you for everyone as well for joining us and engaging in the chat and listening in. And we look forward to more conversations moving forward. Thank you, everyone.